So, right, so those are the chemoreceptors, those are the neural controls. If the neural control doesn't necessarily fix the problem, there are hormones that regulate your cardiovascular system. Now, hormones are usually long-term things, right? The big difference between the endocrine system and the nervous system is that the endocrine system, the signals last for a much longer time. So most of these things that are triggered by your hormones are going to be much longer lasting. In the short term, right, you can release epinephrine and norepinephrine to stimulate cardiac output and peripheral vasoconstriction. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are adrenaline. That's what we call a rush of adrenaline, right? So there's this pathway that your brain is connected to your adrenal medulla, right? And when fight or flight takes place, when your brain perceives a threat, you release adrenaline. That's what the short term is. And that if you have a rush of adrenaline, your heart starts beating faster, right? That makes sense. The long-term effects can be regulated by ADH, angiotensin 2, and erythropoietin to raise your blood pressure when it's too low, and atrial natriuretic peptide, ANP, which lowers your blood pressure when it's too high. So most people have this problem, right? Most people have higher blood pressure and their body's trying to lower it. Having low blood pressure and trying to raise it, that's usually a situation where somebody has been in some sort of trauma, right? Some sort of an accident or something, and their blood pressure has dropped. So antidiuretic hormone, how does this work? Well, we know the antidiuretic hormone is released from your posterior pituitary, right? And this is going to, when your body senses that there's not a large volume of blood, right? This is why this happens sometimes with a trauma or an accident. You lose blood, you lose volume. And so what your body wants to do is increase that osmotic concentration, right? Your body senses that there's this low blood volume, and part of what it does is it holds on to water. And ADH is the hormone that tells your body to hold on to water. And what that's going to do is increase your blood volume quickly, in a pretty quick manner. And so it's going to elevate your blood pressure, right? And you're conserving the water by the kidneys, which prevents reduction in blood volume. You're trying to get that blood volume back up. Angiotensin 2 also gets released when blood pressure decreases. It causes the kidneys to secrete renin, and renin starts this big chain reaction that converts angiotensin into angiotensin 2. You don't need to know any of that. But when blood pressure is low, angiotensin 2 gets released, which stimulates cardiac output and arteriolar constriction. Right? So again, you're putting out more blood and you're constricting the arteries, trying to get that blood pressure back up. Right? It stimulates the release of ADH and aldosterone. So angiotensin 2 actually stimulates the release of ADH. So they're working hand in hand to try to get that blood pressure back up and that volume back up. It also stimulates your thirst center, right? So not only are you retaining water, but you're trying to drink more water. Your body's trying to absorb more water. And all of this will immediately increase your blood pressure. Also, the third one that is released when your blood pressure is too low is erythropoietin. So we talked about it being released when your oxygen levels drop. And that's true. When your oxygen levels drop, you release this hormone, which tells you to make more red blood cells. So this stimulates red blood cell production. So again, if your blood pressure drops, if you don't have enough blood, if your blood volume drops, what are you going to do? Your body's going to make more of these red blood cells to try to get that blood volume back up. And then this hormone, this fourth one, is the opposite of those first three, ANP, right? It's released by the atria, it's released by the heart when blood pressure increases. When the heart detects that blood pressure is too high or is increasing, it releases ANP. And what ANP does is it increases sodium loss by your kidneys. So it helps you get rid of water. So instead of retaining water, you're trying to get rid of water. It's reducing your thirst, right? So you're drinking less water. It's blocking these first three that we talked about. right? It's blocking ADH, it's blocking aldosterone. It stimulates arteriodilation, and the result is that your blood volume and your blood pressure will decrease. So there's the homeostasis of that. So then, that's just stuff that's happening every day that you don't really think about. So what happens? What are the responses to exercise? So both your output and your pattern of blood distribution change, which is crazy. It's not crazy to me to think the output changes. That makes sense, right? Your cardiac output can increase from 6 liters per minute up to like 20 liters per minute if you're exercising a lot. That makes sense. You need more oxygen to the muscles, so your heart's going to push out more blood. But the blood distribution changes, which is pretty cool, which we'll see. Extensive vasodilation occurs when increased oxygen consumption by skeletal muscles. So you're using a lot more oxygen because you're using your muscles. You're going to dilate those blood vessels, try to get more blood to those areas. Peripheral resistance decreases as we exercise. There's less and less of that resistance. And blood flow through the capillaries and into the veins increases. This all increases your venous return. This increases how much blood comes back to your heart, which increases activity of skeletal muscle and respiratory pumps. So increased cardiac output, right? This is due to an increased venous return and the atrial stretching. Increased cardiac output balances out decrease in peripheral resistance to maintain arterial pressures. So what's happening? Your cardiac output increases towards a maximum level. So you're almost squeezing out as much blood as you can every time your heart beats. The blood pressure increases. And what that does is it shunts blood away from the non-essential organs. So you have enough blood pressure that not only is your blood going to your essential organs, but all of your non-essential organs are kind of not getting that blood flow. You're trying to push that blood flow to the muscles rather than the non-essential organs. So non-essential organs would be things like your digestive system, right? It's not essential. It's not essential to get blood every minute of every day. This ensures adequate perfusion of the heart and the skeletal muscles. Basically, if you're exercising, you just want a lot of blood going to your heart and your muscles, right? So that's what's happening in terms of what's happening in cardiovascular response in terms of exercise. The response to hemorrhage, loss of blood, it causes a decrease in blood pressure, right? If you're hemorrhaging, you're losing blood, your blood pressure drops. What happens is your carotid and aortic reflexes increase cardiac output and peripheral resistance. Your venous blood reservoir is mobilized through vasoconstriction. And so what happens is your cardiac output is maintained by increasing your heart rate, right? If you hemorrhage, your heart rate's going to go up. Sympathetic nervous system is going to be activated. It's going to release things like epinephrine, ADH, renin, angiotensin II. All of those are there to elevate your blood pressure. The long-term response to hemorrhage is that once these fluids start to return back to a normal volume, which can take a few days, the fluids are kind of taken back from the interstitial space by a decrease in capillary blood pressure. So what's happening is ADH and aldosterone have promoted you to hold on to fluids. Your thirst is increased. Your erythropoietin has triggered red blood cell production. And all of those mechanisms are leading to the increase in blood volume and blood pressure to try to get it back to what it was before the hemorrhaging. All right. So a lot of that stuff is technical, right? It's a lot of monotonous things. The cardiovascular system itself is divided into a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. We talked about this with the heart, right? The pulmonary circuit has to do with the lungs. So that's when the blood is going through the right side of the heart to the lungs and back, right? It starts at the right ventricle, goes to the lungs, comes back into the left atrium. The systemic circuit has to do with the arteries and veins transporting blood to and from all the other organs and tissues. So this starts at the left ventricle and leaves your heart, goes to your head, all the way from your head to your toes, and comes back into the right atrium of the heart. So most of what we talk about is the systemic circuit, right? This is where most of your arteries and veins are. Pulmonary circuit, you just have a right and a left pulmonary artery going to pulmonary capillaries, and then you have right and left pulmonary veins coming back to your heart. That's it. That's the pulmonary circuit. Systemic circuit, you have arteries and veins going everywhere. Your neck, your head, your arms, your legs, your organs, your internal organs, everywhere. So this is a picture which shows the heart in the middle, okay, leaving the right ventricle, going to your lungs, coming back into your left atrium. That's pulmonary circuit. That's it. But leaving the left ventricle, going to your kidneys, your digestive organs, your gonads, your lower limbs, your upper limbs, your brain, your head, and your neck, all of that is systemic circuit. And that's where we are going to name a lot of these blood vessels. So again, this is where I think drawing the heart and drawing the blood vessels kind of helps a lot, right? The pulmonary circuit, again, this is just going over the pulmonary circuit, which are just pulmonary arteries, which go to smaller pulmonary arterioles, which go to capillaries, which come back through pulmonary veins, right? That's it. Your pulmonary circuit is contained right there. It's just between the heart and the lungs. The heart doesn't have to push very hard to get blood to the lungs and back. The systemic circuit, however, is much bigger and more involved. And so in the systemic circuit, you get the aorta, which is leaving the left ventricle, and then you get branching off the aorta. Okay. And so you can see here, zoom in a little bit. Here's the aortic arch, right? And you can see branching off the aortic arch into the subclavian. Now, subclavian means below the clavicle. So those are the ones that go out past the arm, or towards the shoulders. You also have branching that goes into your common carotids, which go up to your head and neck. Right, and then the subclavian becomes other arteries as we get into the arm, becomes the axillary, then the brachial, the radial, the ulnar. Then your aorta kind of goes down towards your kidneys and your digestive organs. You have branches to go to those organs. Then it branches and goes down to your legs. Right, so these are all arteries. They're all bringing blood away from your heart and your systemic circuit. What you need to know are definitely the three elastic arteries of the aortic arch, which are the first one is the brachiocephalic trunk, the second is the left common carotid, and the third is the left subclavian. I thought I had a better picture of that. Right, the carotids then branch further into external and internal to supply the brain. The descending aorta becomes a thoracic aorta and an abdominal aorta, right? And then it branches into the phrenic arteries, which go to the diaphragm. And the gonadal arteries go to the testes or the ovaries. The adrenal arteries go to the adrenal glands. The renal arteries go to the kidneys. The lumbar arteries go to the spinal cord and the abdominal wall. And then that aorta branches, right? It gets down to your hips, to your legs, and it branches into what are called common iliac arteries. And that branches even further into an external and internal iliac. Right, so here's a picture. The heart is taken out. The heart would be right here. This is your aortic arch. Your first branch off the aortic arch is your brachiocephalic. Your second branch is your left common carotid. Your third is your left subclavian. Right, and then this becomes your thoracic aorta. And I'm not making you know all of these arteries. I only want you to know the arteries that were named in those previous slides. And so I'll actually post another list of those just to make sure it's clear. your thoracic aorta. I lost my cursor. There it is. Your thoracic aorta comes down through your diaphragm, becomes your abdominal aorta, right? And then you've got branches that go to different organs. Then that splits to go to your legs. Where it splits here, these are called your common iliac arteries. And then you can see down here, right at the very bottom of this picture, it splits into what's called an external and an internal iliac artery. Okay, and here's a nice branching pattern, right? This shows where the branches come off. The lower limb, right? The external iliac branches into the femoral. The femoral changes name to the popliteal artery, sorry, once it reaches the back of the knee. And then that branches into an anterior tibial, posterior tibial, and a fibular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a sheet that names the arteries that I want you to know, because there are a lot of arteries. Now that was only arteries, right? We didn't name veins. Here's what you need to know. The veins run everywhere that the arteries run, right? If you have blood vessels carrying blood to your neck, you're going to have blood vessels carrying blood away from your neck. Most of the time, they are the same names. You have subclavian arteries, you have subclavian veins, right? You have adrenal arteries, you have adrenal veins. You have common iliac arteries, you have common iliac veins. There are a few that are different. There's a few things that are different, let's say. So arteries and veins usually run in parallel. They often have similar names or the same names. There's a couple exceptions where the names are different. Arteries are usually deep, veins are usually closer to the surface. That's why blood is usually taken from a vein. Veins usually have a set of 2 for every artery. So there's usually kind of one near the surface and one deeper. You have more veins than arteries. You have more blood vessels carrying blood back to your heart than you have arteries. And that has to do with the fact that you have less blood pressure in them. So you need more of these veins carrying blood back to your arteries, back to your heart. So I will also list the veins that you need to know, right? And they're on this diagram. And you can see a lot of these, if I blow this up a little bit, you can see a lot of these have the same names. Brachiocephalic, axillary, diaphragm, the columbar veins, the common iliac veins, the radial vein, the ulnar vein. But in addition, you have things like the median antebrachial, right? And that's the one they take blood from usually. A couple exceptions. The arteries that go to your head and neck are called carotids. The veins that come from your head and neck are called jugulars. I don't know why they're different names, but they're in the same place. They're just different names. Any of the other places where there's different names, it's because there's additional veins, right? You can see here in the arm, for example, there's a radial vein near the thumb, and there's an ulnar vein near the pinky, but there's a third vein in the middle called the median antebrachial, right? So in the limbs especially, there are extra veins. There are more veins than there are arteries. And I will make sure that you have a list of those. They all lead back to the vena cava, right? The veins that are coming from the head and neck and the upper limbs and the shoulders, anything above the heart comes into the superior vena cava, right? Anything from below the heart goes into the inferior vena cava. So those are the veins going into the superior vena cava, right? And then the veins going into the inferior vena cava. And here's a nice diagram showing, this shows the branching patterns. Remember, the veins are coming back to the heart, so they are joining together to eventually become the vena cava, which goes back into the heart. So I will make a list of arteries and veins just to make sure that you guys are aware of which ones I want you to know. Now, what I'm going to propose is that we don't have class on Friday. I will send out an email when I post this tonight. We don't have class on Friday, but we can meet on Monday. You guys let me know. We can meet on Monday and go over anything that we want. We've gone through the blood vessels now, so review this chapter. I'm going to review Pearson to make sure that I have, some assignments up and everything. I think I do, but I might have to just move some dates around. The next thing that we'll go over on Wednesday will be the lymphatic system, right? The next chapter is the lymphatic system and the immune system, which is pretty lengthy. We'll go over that on Wednesday. And then we'll have a test on all 4 of these chapters, which sounds like a lot, but they're all so closely related. It's really hard to break those up. So between now and next Wednesday, I want you to do the dissection of the heart as well. And so I'll go to your 194 page here. There is, right, the blood typing. Hopefully you guys did that. There's a heart dissection PDF, and then there's a demo, and there's a place to upload some photos. I need to change the due dates of these photos. I think it's still from last semester, probably. So that will be what we'll do for next Wednesday. Again, email me, let me know if you want to meet on Monday. We can meet sometime on Monday if you want to go over anything. We won't have class on Friday. Enjoy, Thursday and Friday. Hopefully you get to enjoy it with family. And we'll go from there, and just make sure you email me if you have any questions as you're going through this stuff. Okay. All right.
Alrighty. Well, you have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too.
Alrighty.
All right.
You take care.
You too, Kristen. Bye.